We're in a world where population is increasing. It's increasing by roughly the same magnitude each year as the population of the United Kingdom. And so the question you need to think about, I think, is how can we increase the amount of food that we produce?
There's a huge diversity of farming systems across the EU. That would range from very large arable farms, maybe in the Paris Basin, in parts of East Anglia in the UK, through to some very, very small farms if you think about alpine farms or some of the farms in Eastern Europe. If you look across Europe, there's a great diversity of systems. Into the south of Europe, at the Mediterranean systems have the potential to be extremely productive, but generally need some form of irrigation to support that productivity. So we move more into Central Europe and into Western Europe, we see a lot less irrigation, a lot more broadacre crops, so you might see a lot more wheat, barley, oilseed rape, potatoes, which are grown on often quite large areas. We're seeing increasingly in the more intensive systems this use of precision as a way of essentially driving down costs as one thing, because if you apply less pesticide, less fertilizer, that will save you money. But also there are many environmental benefits if we're reducing the amount of fertilizer and pesticide we're applying.
It's no longer satisfactory just to tell the farmer, oh, you put so many kilograms of nitrogen on this field. We need to be more rational. Some parts of the field might need 250, but some might only need 150. The sprayer technology has been available for many years, which will enable you to spatially variably apply inputs. We can vary seed rates. So where you've got particular problems, maybe adverse sowing conditions, we can apply extra seeds in those areas. So there's a lot of potential. We can do quite a lot. If you want just a little anecdote, we're actually working here on what we call robotic weeding. And this is actually a strategy designed no application of pesticide to the crop or herbicide to the crop, none to the soil. Only apply it to the plants you don't want. And you may even decide, actually, I do want some of these weeds. Perhaps they have a beneficial effect on non-target organisms. Maybe we need to leave a few just to give the birds something to eat during winter. Something like that. And so we can actually be much more intelligent about the way we do things, because we can control things using engineering solutions now. And so there's great scope for that. These things may not increase yields overall, but they will make resource use, efficiency much greater. The amount of food that we produce isn't the only issue. Something that's also important is the quality. And sometimes you have to sacrifice amount or quantity in order to get quality. And we have to do that, for example, in Europe. If we want bread-making wheat, we do need to cope with the fact that we will get slightly lower yields because we need a higher protein content. So quality is quite a big issue. This is also an issue in terms of consumption in Europe, because the European consumers, particularly, I expect this is true throughout the world, but it's particularly true here, are very fussy or very discriminating about the quality of what they get. Even though nutritional quality might not be reduced, the blemishes that you've got, say, on an apple that you buy, you might not be happy about it, you know, but actually sometimes it won't do you any damage.
In relation to GM, the first field crops were grown internationally in 1996, and really since then we've seen a huge increase in the area of genetically modified crops grown across the world. To give you some example, I think last year there was 170 million hectares of GM crops grown globally. If you looked at the arable area in the UK, that's about 5 million hectares. So that gives you some idea of how much is grown in relation to the area in the UK. Europe essentially has been fairly slow to adopt GM, and indeed there are regulations in place that slow down that adoption. Spain is one of the few countries in Europe that do grow GM crops, mainly BT maize, to defend against a particular pest of maize. So at the moment we're in this situation globally where the expansion, there's a continued expansion, lots of new traits that have advantages agronomically to farmers. that potentially will have health benefits in the future. But the European position at the moment, and that's the same in the UK, is that there's very few crops grown, and indeed there's only one event which is grown, and that's a Monsanto product called Mon A10.
Major cereals in Europe, yields have largely been flatlining since about the mid-90s. If you do want a year to try and latch onto, I think I might suggest 1996. But anyway, since about 1990 to 1998, since then we haven't really seen the increases in productivity that we've been experiencing even since the 1960s and before. But we do need to be aware that although Europe has a great potential for helping to feed the world, and we do, are contributing to it, and we do not only feed our own population, but we can export, nevertheless we are struggling a little bit.
Clearly land is a scarce resource internationally. We're not making any more of it, we hear that many times. And clearly energy is also a pressure globally, international pressure to produce energy, and biofuels are one mechanism by which we can produce energy. The EU has specific targets to meet in terms of its renewable energy production, and biofuels are one way of helping us to meet that target. And some countries within Europe have put in place specific policies to encourage things like biodigesters and the use of grains, for instance, for bioethanol production. So that is happening to a large extent in some countries in Europe, and that does bring a conflict between, food for human consumption and whether you use that to generate energy. In the UK, we're certainly seeing investment in the bioenergy sector. In the end, for the farmer, or the cooperative of farmers, which is sometimes the case in terms of bioenergy production, it really comes down to the economics of whether you can grow it for a food crop and sell it onto the world market or through a specialised contract, versus trying to either generate fuel yourself from that product or indeed selling it on to a third party for use in energy consumption. So there's certainly an interest in biofuel generation, and we've seen an increase in the numbers of digesters and this type of thing, but not on the scale we've seen in some countries. And I suspect that there may be other routes that farmers are exploring in terms of renewable energy production through the use of wind turbines or solar panels that they may invest in before they invest in their own facilities for biodigestion, for instance.